what Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, said in his last two interviews on TV Breaks and NTV. He mentioned that the talks are headed in a wrong direction. What is that wrong direction? What is that the Russian foreign minister is not happy with the current situation of the talks between the United States and Russia?
Well, first of all, I mean, we get into the fact that nobody does negotiations like this. I mean, especially on something as serious as this. Trump, I describe this a little crudely, but this is like the masturbation of negotiations. It's not sex, it's masturbation. This is not negotiations. This is, I don't know what to describe. This is like the McDonald's drive-through fast food of negotiations. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work getting a bunch of people together that they haven't worked out anything. They have their own little points that they're negotiating internally with themselves that don't meet the requirements of one side and don't meet the other. The biggest problem here, just to begin with, between Russia and Ukraine is there is no middle ground. Let's just begin with that. There's absolutely no middle ground. And the losing side, which in this case is Ukraine, hasn't lost enough. Let's just put it that way. They haven't gotten desperate enough. But there's two factors at play. One, they really haven't gotten desperate enough, the elites. And two, is unlike other countries where the elites probably plan to stick around or hope to stick around after some war, even if they lose, or maybe actually care about their people. You know, that's an insane thing these days in the West. You know, politicians actually care about their people. The elites in Ukraine, they're there just to make as much money off of this war as possible and get the hell out. So the longer they pull the strings, the longer they keep people shoveling people into the meat grinder, the more money they make. So they have absolutely no interest in ending this conflict whatsoever under any terms. So no matter what the terms are, until Zelensky's on his knees and there's a sword underneath his chin, or his head is on a stump and there's an axe above his head, this guy isn't going to do anything because he's making money. And that's his future good life. He'll be living the best life he can, the best life ever, somewhere in America or London, while several million Ukrainians are rotting in the ground. And he doesn't mind if that several million turns into 5 or 6 or 10 million. They don't mind. And neither do people like Kellogg, who just said, you know, all these Ukrainians that left, they need to come back. They have to fight for Ukraine. He doesn't. It's not his people. They're making money. Kellogg's making money. His daughter's making money. Everybody's making money. So, hey, and then you got the Russian side that has, you know, we're not giving up these 4 territories. And by the way, it's going to be a lot more if you don't stop. But you're dealing with people who don't want to stop. And then you get the Trump side, which one doesn't have a hard position because his position in the army, we used to call it foundation and jello. It wiggles all over the place. There is no foundation. It's whoever he's talked to last, or whoever's pushed his buttons last, or whoever his donors are telling him last. That's his position. It changes on a daily basis. And this is something that, you know, I don't know what they agreed on in Anchorage, but obviously it was something that they actually agreed on. And from listening to Lavrov, the Americans have backed out of it. Big surprise. The point is this love affair with Trump needs to end. I mean, and Lavrov has passed this love affair. He's passed it. Several other people have passed it. But the government as a whole isn't. At least they're still trying. I understand they don't want a full-blown war, especially with the Europeans. They don't want a full-blown war. But I think that's inevitable because the Europeans are, at least the European elites, are dead set on it. So unless you can overthrow their governments internally and change the elites to somebody that actually has reason, rhyme, and common sense, and maybe a little bit of godliness to them, which I can't say anything like that about the present elites in most of the West. They're hellbound on it. You know, they want a war. So you get one of two choices in this case. Either you run or you stand and fight. Where do you run? There's no place to run. So you stand and fight. But that's the point. So these negotiations, first of all, they're not, like I said, they're not negotiation. They're a real estate deal. Hey, let's talk. And they're, you know, okay, look at the people that were sent. Kushner, businessman. Witkoff, salesman. The other guy, I can't remember his name. He's an investment banker who's now head of government procurement. First, these aren't
the guy Josh, if I'm not mistaken, his name is.
Yeah, something like that. The third guy that just appeared out of nowhere. These aren't professional diplomats. Let's begin with that. These people know nothing about diplomats. These aren't professional negotiators. Negotiating a land purchase and negotiating a big business deal are two different things. Totally. Negotiating a land purchase, basically, you're selling land. You're a glorified salesman, two glorified bankers. This is what you get from the American side. The Ukrainian side are, by the way, all Americans also, because while they may be Ukrainian, they all have American passports. So that really begins to ask the question, who's who and what, so which one of these Americans represent whom? This is the reality of what you're going to be looking at. So, okay, raise your hand if you represent Ukraine out of you Americans. Raise your other hand if you represent America. Okay, your left hand, everybody raises. They represent America. Who parallelly represents Ukraine? I mean, as ludicrous as it sounds, but that's what we're seeing here. I mean, can an actual Ukrainian come over here and represent Ukraine for once? It's maybe Ukraine would be a different place if it was for once ran by an actual Ukrainian in the last 30 years. It hasn't ever. I'm not even going to go into nationalities of all the different nationalities running Ukraine, but Ukrainians are the vast minority in this case. These negotiations, they're not bound to go anywhere. They don't. The one side isn't ready to surrender because it's making money. It'll never be ready to surrender. Russia's going to have to take Kyiv and keep marching until either the people overthrow these parasites, or the parasites have figured out that the body is dead and they need to leave. And the other side, the Russian side, isn't going to back off either. And the American side is approaching this as just basically a land swap. Let's just do a little land swap. And all these other points, well, they're irrelevant. Well, no, they're not irrelevant. And that's the point. The American team is absolutely commerce driven. They don't understand national prerogatives. They don't understand any of this because they don't have any of these kinds of feelings. They don't have any of this in their mind. What national survival? They're commerçants. They're businessmen. They're wheelers and dealers. It's just about how much money we can make. Who needs to be paid what to go in the direction I want. And while it may work with the Ukrainians because they're first and foremost just thieves in power, it doesn't work with the Russians. So yeah, these negotiations, they're not negotiations. They're talking points. From the Russian side, the biggest plus is at least the superpowers are talking. But I'm beginning to think that it's even worse than when it was with Biden, because Biden wouldn't talk, and so you had an enemy that wasn't budging, and you could deal with that fact. Trump is playing games. He is playing verbal games. Whether he wants to play them or not, I don't know. But that's what he is. And the people around him damn well know they're playing games. Hey, don't help Cuba. Maybe we'll acknowledge Crimea or something like that. And I was on a show today. I was on a show for a news show for Crimean television, news television. And I was on a panel of 3 people. And one of the questions in my direction was, well, do you think Trump is going to acknowledge Crimea as part of Russia? Or do you think you can get the Europeans and all that? But why do we need that? Who cares if the Europeans never acknowledge, or Trump never acknowledges Crimea as part of Russia, or these other the other provinces are part of Russia? Who gives a damn what they think? We've turned away from there. Our economy is going east. We've basically put up a wall with them. We have no relations with most of them. Whether they acknowledge or not, historically, this is our land. De facto, this is our land. If they don't, that's flat out. If the Europeans don't like this, my advice to them is get in a tank and drive east and burn in that tank, because that's the only way you're going to get us off our land. End of story. So why would we care? But for some reason, part of the elite still cares. Like, screw what the Western leadership thinks or doesn't think about it. It's our land. If they don't like it, again, come fight us. That's how it's done. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, you remember, Stas, before the winner, we had Keith Kellogg arguing that if Ukraine survives this winner, and gets to this spring and summer, the leverage going to be on the part of the Ukrainians. I don't know what sort of leverage he's talking about. And unfortunately, these people are somehow dominating the whole administration in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Kellogg is, I'm pretty damn sure Kellogg is getting kickbacks from Zelensky. He can't be that dumb. I mean, he did spend quite a bit of time in the military. Through Vietnam, then the collapse of the American military post-Vietnam, the rebuilding of the American military in the 80s and the height in the 90s, which he doesn't, by the way, understand what the state of the sorry state of the U.S. military today. But that's okay. But the fact is, he understands military matters. So if somebody like that is looking at the Ukrainians and saying, "Oh, you're still going to win," seriously, you've either gone senile or you're bought. Now his daughter's making money off of it. Her NGO is helping evacuate dead and wounded Americans. That's not just mercenaries. I mean, they all may be sheep-dipped mercenaries, but there's some real mercs, and then there's the guys sitting in the HIMARS that are, quote, mercenaries. Those are Americans. The guys sitting on the Patriots are mostly Americans or Brits or Germans. And a lot of them are getting killed. American instructors, American officers. There's a lot of Americans that have been killed. And her money maker off of whatever, I don't know who's paying her bills, USAID maybe. Somebody's paying her bills. But the money she's making is by evacuating the remains of dead Americans and wounded Americans. One day, this is all going to come out, just how many hundreds of Americans have been killed, if not thousands. Now, I've been contacted by people from Fort Bragg. We're talking about, yeah, we know guys have gone over there. They've been killed. Their families are paid off to be quiet because officially nothing like this has ever happened. And these aren't special forces guys that you would expect to some. These are various operators for various equipment. So, yeah, I mean, the crap Kellogg is spewing is just insane. Like I said, today was all Ukrainians have left Ukraine need to come back and fight for it. There's a reason they ran away. There's a reason they're still running away. And it has nothing to do with, oh, I want to die for Ukraine and Zelensky. Quite the opposite. You know, the Ukrainian war is a three-tier war for the Ukrainians. And by tiers, I mean by class. So you've got the poor class and the lower middle class. They're doing the fighting. They're getting bussified, or in Russian we call it morgified, into these buses and sent off as meat. In fact, according to some of the sources in Ukraine, 90% of replacements now are bussified, grabbed off the streets by press gangs. 90% of the replacements are not exactly volunteering to go die for Ukraine. Then you've got the middle class, upper middle class. They're the ones that were able to pay off either to get the white sheets that says they're medically unfit, or were able to buy their way out of the country. And they're living as refugees in these different countries. Some of them, of course, are living very well. A lot of them are suddenly great nationalists of Ukraine, now that they're not in Ukraine. The nationalism level inversely rises to the distance away from the front. And then you get the upper class that's split between those still in Ukraine because they're feeding off the system, and those are partying, having their best life ever at every single resort in Europe and other places. And you have videos constantly coming out, all these Lux cars, top line brands with all Ukrainian numbers, these giant parties. You know, people like Klitschko, who's the feeding off the people part. He's sitting there, mayor of Kiev. Oh, you know, we need to lower the draft age to 18, 19, 20, 21. Okay, where's your 21 and 23-year-old boys? Oh, they're in Germany. That's right, partying in Germany from day one. Of course, welcome to the Ukrainian elites.
I think, Stas, what's happening on the ground in Ukraine finally would decide about the end of the conflict as soon as, because it doesn't seem that the Trump administration is getting there or is willing to get there to put an end to the conflict. And on the part of the Europeans, even with there's some sort of chaos in Europe right now, and nobody knows what would happen to Europe in the next, for example, let's say for the next 5 years. We don't know what we're going to see in Europe, because many changes are coming to Europe, and how much those changes would influence the foreign policy of Europe. That is a big question, in my opinion. And do you think that Europe is still relevant? Because after all, in my opinion, let's put it this way. For example, when you have a war, for example, in Iraq and Afghanistan, you cannot ignore the legitimate concerns on the part of Iran, because they're next door.
Right.
I think Ukraine is the next door for both Russia and Europe. That's why, mostly for the eastern part of Europe, there's so much concern, more concern than the western part of Europe. That's why you see some sort of division between the two parts. And how do you see that somehow, changing the foreign policy of Europe?
Well, yeah. If you look at the leadership in Poland and the Baltic republics, the three little witches brew, they're all extreme Russophobes. But interestingly enough, particularly with the three Baltic witches, all their leadership has dual passports. That's an interesting little part. All the top politicians in those three little midget state parasites have dual citizenship. They are not going to stick around once the war starts. The problem is their economies are dead. They were dead before. They were dying before they joined the EU because they couldn't survive without the Soviet Union or a bigger state. When they joined, the Germans made them destroy a lot of their industry that they had left. In fact, Lithuania closed down its nuclear power plants and now had to import energy instead of exporting energy, because the nuclear power plant the Soviet Union built there. So now they've become even poorer. And by the way, there's a lot fewer people. Russians are actually a much larger percentage in those populations than on official record, and I'll explain why. The Russians aren't citizens there. They're not allowed to get citizenship by the ethnic racial codes, basically, the unofficial racial codes. And before anybody says, oh, yeah, Russians just moved in there, blah, blah. Well, there's been Russian settlements in Lithuania and Estonia since the early Middle Ages. And then you go look at a city of Narva, which is in northwestern Estonia. That's an absolutely 95% Russian city, if not all 100. And across the river is Ivangrad, which is a Russian city. Really, this is one city that's been separated by a river and a border that runs down that river. That, by the way, is like the Russian population officially. It's like something like 36, 38% of the Estonian population. But here's why it's a lot bigger than that. Russians don't get the Estonian passport, as an example. They can't travel. If they're Russian by nationality, they can't get the Estonian passport. They get a gray passport. That means they live in Estonia, but they don't have anybody's citizenship. They don't have Russian citizenship. They don't have Estonian citizenship. They can't travel into Europe. Estonians and the rest of the pre-Baltics, their youth have ran away 20 years ago. There's people, I mean, and it's flooding out as fast as they can get the hell out of these hellholes, economic hellholes. Well, the problem is, well, for the statistics is, and Poland does the same thing, by the way, they continue to count the people that haven't lived there in 10, 15, 20 years as living there. I mean, these people may come back once a year, once every couple of years to see their relatives, but that's it. They don't live there. They're living in Poland, or they may be living in Germany or wherever. But they're not living in those three countries. And a lot of Poles, by the way, did the same thing. And Poland continues to count them. All four of them continue to do this. So they boost their census numbers with people who don't live there. They might as well be dead. They don't live there. So the reality is, because the Russians can't go and the Estonians run away, the Russian population is probably closer to 50% of the actual living population of Estonia. And they're repressed. So, and they're very repressed by the Estonian government. Again, you could say do that to the Jews or the Gypsies or whoever that didn't have another country to run to. You do the Russians, who across the border is another 150 million of them. Yeah, that's probably not the best idea. The best idea would be, I don't know, make friends and live peacefully. I mean, these are the same idiots that severed their electric cables. They were part of a joint network, the Baltic, Belarus, and northern Russia were all part of the same electric network. So they had relatively cheap electricity, more expensive than Russia, but relatively cheap and stable. They cut that a year ago in 2 days. They had a ceremony. They cut the high voltage line. They took that piece and put it in a museum. And now they spot rate buy their electricity from their neighbors, Sweden, from Finland, and from Poland. And their prices have gone up about 3.5 times. So their businesses are closing, their economies are collapsing. People, you have to wait till like 2 or 3 in the morning to switch on their washing machines because that's the cheapest electricity. They literally have programs to check rates every hour. So, and these nations, the only thing they have left to sell is themselves as Platzdarms for the next big war. So you've got that point going. Europe as a whole, we can't ignore them. I mean, economically, they're dead in the water. I was talking to I have several friends in Italy. One of them is a political professor of political science. He's telling me, the average Italian is trying to figure out how to feed himself and his family by week 4 of the month. And that week is getting longer and longer because the people are getting poorer and poorer. But again, economically, they may be relatively dead. But as a threat, they still remain as a threat. So then, yes, they can't be totally ignored. In fact, they have to be prepared for it. The Americans will be happy to sell them equipment. America has a huge amount of M1 and M1A1 tanks in preservation, almost about 5,000 of them. So either you sell them or you cut them up. It's much better to sell them. And then the Americans, once they push Europe into a big war, they'll sit back as a neutral power and just sell equipment to the Europeans, make money. And you know what Americans call the World War II? They call it the Great War. Not because it was huge, but because it was great. It was great because it lifted the U.S. up from the Depression and put it back on its feet. It was great economically. And they put the Great War, they put the article in front of it. Well, I think it was 1998 in Forbes. I read the first article that went into, we need another great war to get us back on the proper financial footing. We need another huge war in Europe. And that's exactly what they were saying. This is 1998. We need a huge big war in Europe, so Europe is destroyed, then we'll become creditors, and the European, we'll write off our debts to the Europeans, we become creditors, and then we rebuild them. So this, and if it's already been published in places like Forbes, the elites are already discussing this for several years. And this is 20 plus years ago. They've been working toward this, and they're going to get their way. Europe is going to go extinct or something close to it. And that's, by the way, an interesting thing about Europe. When the EU posts photos, we are Europe. So, you get a photo, you get one white girl, you get an African, you get an Arab, you get an Indian or Pakistani. We are Europe, But when they put a poster up, defend Europe, it's all white guys. It's like, wait a minute, something's not right here. So the white guys, you're all worthless except for meat on the battlefield. And then the rest of you don't even count as Europeans now. So, so that's the message that you get.